You're listening to all of it on WNYC. I'm Allison Stewart. When WNYC and Goth Miss Culture editor Matthew Schnipper's son Renzo was only 22 months old, he suffered a brain aneurysm. It was caused by a malformation in his brain that was present at birth. Renzo died on Christmas Eve 2021. In the wake of his son's death, Matt tried to make sense of how to move forward. He joined grief groups. A longtime music journalist, Matt tried listening to music and collecting rare records. He started a Depop reselling store. He ate cookies. Matt also began writing a book, which is out today. The memoir is titled Rise Above. It's a story of grief and resilience, of the power of music and friendship, and of profound love. In it, Matt writes, there are a lot of things you can say to someone suffering. I'd recommend, though, not telling someone that you can't imagine what they're going through, because the pain I felt is imaginable, as is yours, if you take the time to imagine it. Rise Above is out today. WNYC and Goth Miss Culture editor Matthew Schnipper has taken a break from the newsroom to join us in studio today. You could catch him at McNally Jackson Seaport at 7 p.m. in conversation with Wasu, but it's sold out, but you never know because of the rain. So you never know.
I will be there.
Matt, tell us a little bit about Renzo. What was he like?
Well, thanks for having me, Allison. I mean, Renzo, one of the things that I think was interesting in writing this book to me to realize was that Renzo was a little boy. He was a kid who liked doing kid things. And I think it was almost nice to catalog those things and find his sort of idiosyncrasies. But he was a very handsome, very sweet little boy, a little bit serious. Most of his life was during the pandemic. So I had actually gotten laid off couple months after he was born, and I spent a lot of time with him. And he had a little bit of a wink of mischief, but not so much. And he was a baby. I think that was sort of what was strange about this book, and almost about remembering him, is that I think I talked about in the book. Maybe I can't remember if I did. I wrote my grandfather's obituary when he died, and I had all of these things to pull from. My grandfather bought a car every year. He was kind of cheap. He loved the Jets, whatever else. My son, it was like, well, he was a baby who, didn't like getting his hair cut and was into balloons. These things which are sort of child tropes, but that's who he was. But they were so personal and so real when I was in them with him. And so I have all these kind of very specific memories where it's like, he liked this orange balloon one day. And I think about that all the time, this balloon. And it's not a particularly unique thing, but it was him. So he was very specific, but he was also just a baby,
When you have a kid, you want to be a certain kind of parent.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm going to be the parent who reads to my kids. I'm going to be the parent that takes them to the park. What kind of parent did you want to be?
I mean, I wanted to be all those things. I was also terrified of him getting COVID. I read about in the book. I sort of almost jokingly was like, I'm going to play him every kind of music that we could. Mm-hmm. So we would have little sessions where we'd hang out in the bedroom, and I'd play him 3-6 Mafia, or I'd play him, I'd play him disco, or I'd play him. Early in the book, I read about it. Played him Morbid Angels, death metal band, almost just sort of to troll him. I don't know. Can you troll a baby? It's just like, what will happen if this happens?
Yeah.
But there was that idea. It's like, well, if you give your kid spicy food when they're a baby, maybe they'll just learn to like spicy food. If you take your kid out surfing, maybe they'll become a surfer. And I was like, well, maybe he'll just get really into, death metal, whatever else. I really just wanted to be present. I think what I wanted to do, I always wanted to be a father. And I really just wanted to hang out with him. I wanted to make him laugh because that seemed very exciting. But really I wanted to put him, kind of in fun outfits and just hang. And some of my favorite memories with him was just, I would take him on a walk every day. My wife had gone back to work, and I would just stroll him for a long time. That, in the first summer he was alive. And then just taking a long walk with him, communing him. And I remember I would take him and I would turn the stroller around and be like, look out at this, look at this and this and this, and I would have a mask on and he wouldn't because he was so small, and I just wanted him to see, I was the kind of parent, I think, that just wanted him to participate.
You write in the book about the fact that there are no words for parents who have lost a child.
Yeah.
You write, there's no name for the parent of a child who has died. Why not? It is so rare an occurrence that language has had no need to label it. That seems unlikely. There were surely more parents of dead children than there are billionaires, and I know what to call them. I hear about them all the time. If we had a name, would people talk about us?
Yeah.
What do you think about language? How did it affect your experience as a grieving parent?
I think that's a great question. I mean, for me, I've always... To answer that specific question, there is always satisfaction with a diagnosis. You know, you're sick and you say, I have this symptom and this symptom, and you go see all these rare specialists or whatever else, and they say, oh, you have this. And then you go, okay, well, now I have a plan of attack. Because if you put it inside of a box, it kind of, it has a category, you understand, and other people can also understand it well because they're familiar with that thing. I think without being a member of a group that was easy to identify, I felt very alone. It wasn't as though, oh, this is how you're a cancer patient, or you're,
Use the cough button. Go ahead.
It's possible I have stressed myself out into a cold, but with this book coming out, but
sure.
I don't know. Excuse me. Without having that, I did realize, it was harder to get in touch. And you have to kind of describe what you are, Well, I'm a parent, but my child, I did have a child. Am I still a parent? I don't know. And people would say, you are a parent. And I would say, but am I? And I started thinking, well, are people who are widowed still married? All of these kind of specific things. It made it hard to identify who I was to other people. And sometimes people would say, oh, you're still a parent. And I would start to get angry. Well, I'm not. My kid died. That's not the same thing. So I would kind of grasp for language to kind of identify who I was so that I could kind of, I don't want to say sell it to other people, but so other people could understand where I was coming from. And that was difficult.
My guest is WNYC and Gothist culture editor Matthew Schnipper. We're discussing his new memoir, Rise Above, about the sudden death of his son Renzo at 22 months old. In writing this book, what did it teach you about your experience grieving?
That's a good question. I think when I started writing this book, I think I felt a little bit like, oh, I'm going to teach people stuff. I know everything now, and I've experienced this, and I'm going to put this down, which I think was nonsense. I don't think I had any idea what I was experiencing. What writing this book allowed me to do, and I'd gotten a book deal. I wrote an essay in the New Yorker and was approached about writing a book, and I said, yeah, I want to do that. And then I signed a book deal, and then I didn't write any of it for months. I was terrified. And eventually I quit my job and said I need to kind of focus on this. And the year and a half or so that I spent writing it gave me time and space to think about my son, to think about my daughter who was born about a year after he died, and to think about both what had happened to me and who I wanted to be in the future. So I was able to kind of catalog what had happened. How did I spend these days? There are a lot of references in the book. I talked about watching Emily in Paris after he died. I talked about all of the different music I listened to and the art that I saw. All of these things are interchangeable. That's just what I experienced. If you've experienced pain, you probably use something else as a salve. I wanted to kind of talk about the kind of texture of my life at that point. But really what was so beneficial was having that time. And, for anybody who's listening, who's a writer, who either journals, writes, whatever, to be able to get it out and to have that be the focus of my day was incredibly helpful. Because, when you're angry, you're upset, it will come out in the sideways ways when you don't necessarily want it to. And so what I was able to do was spend my day thinking, spend my day processing. And at first I was very angry. I wrote this book and I was so mad. And I looked at those first drafts and, they seethed to me,
I'm sure.
And I realized, oh, that's not who I want to be. But it was helpful to have a place where it could go. So what I think I learned was that if you have a lot of emotions, tend to them. I mean, no, that's not a huge thing. It's not a giant revelation. But I learned that I absolutely needed to. And doing it in writing and trying to bring some life and fun. And, I think this book has jokes. Is worth doing because that's the kind of person that I am, even in the context of such kind of, such a terrible event.
At the beginning of that answer, you said, I was terrified to write.
Yeah.
What were you terrified of?
I mean, that's a great question. I think I was terrified both of doing a bad job, to be honest, and I was terrified of spending all this time kind of facing it. You know, I knew I spent months and months writing the first chapter, where I basically just talked about a kind of hero of mine, a musician named Henry Rollins, who's my son's middle name was Rollins. And I just worked that over and over and over until it was like, you need to actually start thinking about I need to actually talk about Renzo and what had happened. I was kind of putting it off, sitting at this writing center, kind of noodling about Henry Rollins' life forever, making large metaphors. I was scared, I think, to just kind of say, okay, what happened? You know, as though if I didn't write it down, then maybe it wouldn't have happened.
What did you do to take care of yourself as you were writing this book?
I mean, you mentioned cookies. I think it's funny, you know, my wife read this book and one thing she said was like, you wrote about eating cookies too much. Because it was true. It was just like, I was just eating a lot. I ate a lot of weight. Because it was comforting, you know. I don't really drink. I don't do drugs. I don't like, you know, I'm not an exercise guy. I tried that for a little while. Wasn't great. So I was like, yeah, I'm just going to go back to eating a lot of cookies. I mean, I also went to different kinds of therapy. I talked to friends. I made a few close friends who had lost people. A close friend of mine had lost her husband very suddenly. And we would text when we were angry and the other person kind of understood. You know, I kind of just tried to survive, you know. I really just tried to get through the day, one day at a time. It sounds kind of basic, but like it's not so different than anybody else. It was just like, what is at hand right now? I'm going to try to process it without losing my mind.
Music is so connected to memory. It's connected to your story. It's connected to your life. When you think back to the weeks and months after Renzo's death, what music comes to mind?
I think a lot first about listening to a musician named Robert Wyatt. And he's great. If you haven't, check his music out. And I remember there's an album called Old Rotten Hat that I loved. He's a British musician. He has this kind of squeaky Muppet voice. And I remember putting that record on one day and then immediately being like, turn this off. I was like, this was a horrible idea and being mad at Robert Wyatt, you know, being like, oh, he's got this funny little voice and he's trying to have a good day, whatever. He's trying to be goofy and sing his little songs. So it's like, your life is not fun, you know, whatever. Robert Wyatt had a very tough life. No shade to Robert Wyatt. I now enjoy listening to his music. But everything had turned sour, you know, and that sucked. So I had to search for what was palatable. You know, it was like my ears were grieving. So I started listening to a lot of piano, very light piano music. And then I started listening to a musician named Bill Callahan. He used to go by the name Smog, who I listened to a lot in my life, who has this very, very deep, very somber voice. And he was very wise. So I spent a lot of time listening to his music. And I was lucky enough that I reached out to him and he actually read the audiobook for this book, which is really nice.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's been a dream.
During this period, immediately after, you start figuring out ways to occupy your time. And one of them was your own Depop shop.
Yeah.
Reselling clothes online. And you kept pretty busy. But you wrote interesting, filling your time with tasks is not the same as healing your pain. It's something you do to avoid it. When did you realize you were filling your time?
I mean, when I really... So Depop is an eBay-like marketplace, very popular with Gen Z, a demographic I am older than. And I got really interested in trying to sell them clothes. After a while, you know, this is not a particularly good... The ROI on making money is low. But it filled up my time. I would take pictures. I would steam the shirts, measure the clothing, write a description. And it was kind of fun because it gave me something to do. But then I was like, I was spending time, you know, back and forth. I'd get an offer for a shirt I'd listed for $15 and someone would want to buy it for $9. And I'd be like, okay, well, what about 12? And then maybe, you know, at one point, if I'm being completely honest with you, some guy was lowballing me on a pair of shorts that were like $11. And I finally just blocked him because he kept sending me these low offers. And then he found me on Instagram and was like, why'd you block me on Depop? I'm just trying to get a pair of shorts. And I was like, what am I doing? I was
Yeah.
like, this is not a good use of my time.
You probably thought you were controlling something.
Yeah, I think it was something that I could do. Maybe I'm being hard on myself, and I'm sure there was some element of this which was soothing. I'm sure I was doing this in the same way people kind of watch, unboxing videos or something. You turn your brain off, and that's what it did. But this was not a time when I needed to avoid what was happening. It was a time when I needed to actually kind of confront it. So I'm still selling stuff online. Don't believe me. I still, I haven't stopped doing it. I'm, addicted to doing that. I went to the post office with a bunch of packages yesterday. But yeah, when I was arguing with people about $2, that's when I thought maybe this is not a good plan.
You and your wife Allegra emerged from the other side still together. You have a daughter.
We do, yeah.
How do you think you managed to hold on to each other during this experience?
One of the things that you learn, and I talk about anyone who is grieving will maybe come across the name David Kessler, who is a grief therapist, and he's extraordinarily helpful. And he talked about, he had a series of videos about when you lose a child, and he said, you and your spouse will be two empty tanks. You're out of gas, and it's very hard to lean on the other person, which is difficult because that is that's kind of the whole construct of a marriage. We very purposely had to say to each other, we believe in this relationship and we want it to move forward. And we're each going to have individual struggles that the other one cannot heal. This book in and of itself is that, but I think the knowledge, this kind of self-awareness that, we were going to have to look outside of each other to do that healing and then come back, as a pair, was hard. It's not a thing that you want to admit, that I want to say, okay, you can't give me what I want, or I can't look to you what I want. I need to go do that somewhere else. I think I was lucky enough that I had the opportunity to do that on the page.
You're the parent of Coco now.
Yes. Crazy child.
How have you and your wife fought against the impulse to just be around her all the time, not to be helicopter parents?
No, I haven't fought against that at all. I want to hang out with her constantly. The first time I spent a night away from her, I was really, I was pretty torn up. I mean, she has a lot of life. This child, I love her very, very much. She is not a kind of person that is, she's not a chill kid. She just is, and so it's fun to hang out with her. I like hanging out with her. She's my friend. I love being around her, and I feel lucky to have that be the case. I don't think that I'm gripped with the same fear anymore. There are moments where I have experienced moments where I've gone, something's happening, and I've been kind of tunnel vision, which is hard. But no, I don't think I've escaped that desire to I don't think I'm a normal parent. In a lot of ways I am. I think I'm a very loving parent. She's only 3.5, so
do you know
we'll
when
see
you're
how
going to
things
tell her
change.
about Renzo?
When?
Yeah.
Soon, yes.
When?
In the next, we've been told that when people are about 4 years old, they have an understanding of death. That kind of will make sense. And we know she has some inklings, but it's something that we're very aware of and talk about quite often. But she does not know yet.
In our last moments, what would you say to someone who's listening right now who's going through an unimaginable loss?
Be nice to yourself. I think it'd be very easy to be angry with people in your network, with your family and friends. Do they not say the right thing? Do they not support you in the way? Figure out what you need and ask them for it. It does put some of that work on you, but they're not going to understand. Be nice to them. Be nice to yourself. Be patient with yourself. If you need to check out, check out. If you want to go on a roller coaster, go on a roller coaster. You want to eat a bunch of cookies? Do it, but be kind to yourself. It's not a given, and you're not going to get the treatment that you want from anybody else but yourself.
The name of the memoir is Rise Above. It was written by Matthew Schnipper. Thank you for taking the time today to be on the show.
Allison, thank you so much for having me.